Having devoted our third lecture module to an exegesis of BonJour's account of justification, and using our fourth lecture module to present the three objections to coherentism that are universally and generally offered up against the view, we'll devote the rest of the lecture to exploring the interplay of these two components, to specifically seeing how BonJour responds to these objections with respect to his own theory, and offering some assessments as to whether or not his responses are successful. We'll start by looking at that second objection, because this is how BonJour seeks to order the objections himself. This is the one that he sees as the most fundamental. The other two he thinks are better dealt with in light of what he says after the first. And that second objection, recall, asserts that coherence doesn't provide us with any real connection between our belief-forming mechanisms and the world. And BonJour will respond to this by arguing that his notion of justification includes an explicit requirement that we have some perceptual beliefs that are formed through inferences about our sensory experiences, and that this provides that connection to the world that mere coherence itself will not. And so we'll want to assess that. And since this is the most important objection in BonJour's own mind, we want to be careful and make sure we have a good sense of how effective that response truly is. After that, we'll turn our attention to the objection that says that coherence is cheap, and hence that it doesn't provide us with a sufficient criterion for distinguishing between alternative but inconsistent coherent belief systems. And BonJour will respond to this by claiming that in the long run, based upon this notion that our coherent belief systems include this perceptual beliefs requirement, incoherence with the world will emerge for systems in the long run, and hence among those coherent belief systems, a victor will emerge as time goes by. Finally, we'll consider the no coherence truth connection. And again, BonJour will claim that incoherence will emerge in belief systems that aren't true in the long run as a result of that perceptual beliefs requirement. And so we see the centrality of that first objection that he considers and his response to it, and how all the other objections are dependent upon its success. And that's why we'll spend a considerable amount of time in the remainder of the lecture focusing on that particular objection. Turning to the first objection to coherence theories, recall that objection notes that coherence is a relationship between beliefs, or maybe a property of belief systems, but it's not a relationship between beliefs in the world or belief systems in the world, and hence it doesn't provide any obvious mechanism through which beliefs might be shaped by or constrained by features of the world. And BonJour responds to that by noting that in his view, in order for a belief system to be justified, it has to include perceptual beliefs. And he then says it's going to include these perceptual beliefs, but how these perceptual beliefs get justified is distinct from the processes whereby they originate, so that their justification comes qua coherence and inferences, but their connection to the world is a different thing altogether. And we're really going to have to look carefully at whether or not that turns out to be true. The way he suggests it is that the schema for belief justification is inferential, and he'll give that to us, and we'll see that in a few slides. And it's based on empirical premises that are known in a rough and ready way. We'll want to look at that more carefully as well. And he says that that is independent of, but presupposes that the processes whereby various sensory beliefs originate are reliable in two senses: in production and in being triggered. So they're reliable in being triggered in that they're sensitive to things that are going on in the environment. If something happens in the environment, our senses, our perception captures that thing. And in production, they are also reliable in the sense that they're likely to produce accurate depictions of those things that trigger them in the environment. Now, the first thing that probably should occur to us here is that BonJour has now hitched his view to requiring reliable belief-forming processes. And in fact, it doesn't look like his view can actually answer the second objection independent of the supposition that we have these belief-forming processes and they're reliable. And it seems, therefore, that they make an epistemic contribution to the overall status of his belief system. If they're not reliable in those two senses, then they don't establish that connection between the world, and hence it seems like they can't underpin a claim that his belief systems are in fact sensitive to and likely to be shaped by features in the world. And so this seems to invalidate his claim that all beliefs are justified in his system solely in virtue of their inferential relations as they are determined in those four arguments that he outlines in his theory of justification. Now later, BonJour seems to state his requirement in terms of the system having beliefs about spontaneously generated beliefs. In other words, we have beliefs that those processes that are responsible for our sensory beliefs are in fact reliable in these two senses. But it's clear that without the actual reliability of those processes in those two senses, requiring beliefs to cohere with one another and requiring that we have those beliefs in no way guarantees that the system will have any interesting relationship to the world. There remains one other troubling aspect of BonJour's claim here. BonJour claims that the outlined inferences that he requires, right, those inferences that result in beliefs about the world based on perception and beliefs about our perceptual processes, they aren't explicit necessarily because, of course, they aren't explicit when we're forming perceptual beliefs or auditory beliefs or olfactory beliefs. Instead, he claims that they're tacitly or implicitly involved in the cognitive state of the person who has observational knowledge. And he says that in a way that he never really articulates. He does tell us that a tacit grasp of the availability of the inference is the basis for the continuing acceptance of the belief and for the conviction that it's warranted. However, this seems troublesome, and I would suggest that this amounts to, as with the functionalist, a counterfactual claim about what possible inferences the knower could make in some specified circumstance. And given BonJour's objections to foundationalism, precisely because he claims we have to be in cognitive possession of this relationship that is the cognitive goal of truth, right? I think that this looks extremely suspect. In other words, how is it that counterfactual inferences allow us to have cognitive possession of the inferential relationships that we don't actually seem to explicitly be aware of? And in fact, we should kind of keep this in mind in light of his argument against the doctrine of the given in that paper on foundationalism. If, as he claims, in order for something to actually count as justifying, it has to have assertive content, can we really, with any confidence at all, suppose that a tacit grasp of the availability of an inference, in fact, has assertive content that actually figures in a justification of the beliefs that we're forming at the time? And this doesn't seem obvious at all.